We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the webinar. We've got our good friend and special guest, Anthony Chara, back with us. If you were not here, he came and he made a few trips to Houston and San Antonio, spoke at our monthly main meetings, and then he came back and did a one-day workshop. And then he'll tell you more about this later on, but he's also going to be back in Houston next weekend for his boot camp, and he'll share the details with you later on. But before we get started, a little housekeeping. One, if you could try to keep yourself muted, that would be appreciated. And then also at the end, like I said earlier, we will open it up for questions and answers. You can also text me your question as well. And also, before we get started, the last thing I want to do is remind you that two reminders. One, we have our Friday call every Friday. It's the Texas Dealmakers call. So if you've got deals that you want to present or you need help with, make sure you're on that call. And then secondly, our upcoming monthly main meetings, check out the website for those. We're going to be doing AI panels. But other than that, thank you, Anthony, for taking another couple hours out of your busy schedule and talking more about apartments. Thank you for joining us tonight.
You bet. Well, thanks for inviting me back again. It's nice to see everybody, or everybody that has their cameras on. Hello.
Welcome. Awesome. And so let's just go ahead and jump in. One of the things that you mentioned when you were here at the main meetings, and then you also talked about in your workshops, was the fact that we're in a very good place for apartments and commercial real estate right now. Basically kind of at the bottom of the market, and it's time to ride it up. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about the state of the market with apartments and commercial?
Okay, I will do that. I think real quick, before I do that, can everybody in the chat box, can you just type in yes or no, whether or not you attended either my presentation or the one-day workshop? So if you attended either one or both, just say yes. If you didn't attend any of them, say no. Wow, a lot of no's. Okay. Thanks, Melissa. And Ken, Alfred and Maura. Awesome. I appreciate it. So I'm glad I asked that question, because before I get into the conversation or answering the question that James just brought up, I should probably give you a little bit of background on me and why James invited me to be here. So I started investing way back in 1993. My wife and I turned our very first house into a rental property and moved into a larger, nicer house. And then for about 10 years, all we really knew back then, we didn't have any real estate education other than you bought a property and you turned into a rental, and bought a property and turned into a rental. So we did that, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 times over the next 10 years. And it wasn't until the early 2000s that I was looking for something else to do. My job was literally killing me. As a matter of fact, those of you that were at the presentation or the workshop, you got a copy of a book that I'm a co-author of, this one right here. And if you'd like a copy of this, I can send you a PDF copy. You can send your information to James, and James can get it to me, and I can send you the PDF copy. Or James, I can just send it to you, and you can send it out to the people who are on tonight. But the reason I mentioned this is because my story is in here about the transition I made from my corporate life to the real estate world. And it's about becoming your best self. It's co-authored with Brian Tracy, Kyle Wilson, Chris Gronkowski, who's Rob Gronkowski's brother. And those of you that are rock fans, Phil Collins, who's one of the lead guitarists for Def Leppard, is also one of the stories. So there's about 30 different authors, and you can see them all in the back. And we all wrote our stories about becoming our best selves. And so one of the issues I was having is my job was literally killing me because I was doing too much traveling, too much flying. I'd actually developed claustrophobia on a flight from Denver to Las Vegas, but it took 2 years to realize it was claustrophobia. I just thought when I was on the flight that I just was sick and that I had the flu or had something bad to eat or any number of things. Well, after 2 years, it's like still going on. My doctors thought I had an ulcer. and it just didn't make any sense. And finally, I realized that the only time I felt nauseated on a regular basis was when I was on a crowded train, a crowded plane, a crowded bus, a crowded church, a crowded movie theater, somewhere where I was in a crowd and literally couldn't escape or didn't feel like I could escape. And so we finally figured out, I figured out myself that it had manifested itself as claustrophobia from all the stress from my job. And so I was looking for something else to do. So we already had some rental properties, but was ready to take it to the next level. And so my job, I had to get out of my job. So I did get out of my job. I talked to my wife, and she was okay with me leaving because I was miserable in the job. So I went out and opened up or started to do note buying. Well, the note buying didn't go anywhere. But part of the note buying seminar business that I was in, or not the business, but going to one of the seminars or a conference for note buying, I met Robert Allen. Well, Robert Allen kind of opened my eyes to the fact that you could do wholesaling and fixing and flipping and apartments and mobile home parks and all these other things that I had no idea you could do. I didn't even know what wholesaling and fixing and flipping were at that time. So I learned from him and his instructors, did a couple fix and flips, did a couple wholesaling deals, but just felt like those deals were just, those types of strategies for me anywhere were too much like a job, like a job. And then met my partner at the time. He wasn't my partner at the time, but I met him and we started doing apartments together. That's George Antone. And we started buying apartments, and we started, literally when we started, because both of us had limited experience, we partnered with other people who did have the experience and rode their coattails in order to gain our experience. So our contribution to the deals was helping them raise money. So the very first deal that we did was a 344 unit apartment complex that a developer was converting from apartments to condominiums, A-class condominiums down in Tucson. So we helped raise $1.35 million of a $5 million raise because he had already bought the properties. He already had the loans in place. The $5 million raise was to upgrade the units, to put in granite countertops, better kitchen cabinets, upgraded appliances, and things like that. So that was our first foray into it. And as I mentioned, I had just kind of gotten tired of doing the single family home thing. My job was killing me, so I had already left my job in 1997. So in the early 2000s, I was looking for something else to do because I knew that the single family homes and just buying one here and one there wasn't going to cut it. So met George, met Robert Allen, and at the same time, I also met another gentleman named Ron Helton here in Denver. And Ron is the one who really got me into apartments because he only owned about 450 units at that time. But out of those 450 units, he was cash flowing $140,000 to $150,000 a month. And that's what really got me excited about apartments, because I knew that with the 7 or 8 or 9, 10 single family homes and condos, that's great. It adds up, but it still wasn't enough to make a big jump. And I was ready to scale up. So made the transition, started doing apartments. We did the 344 units. Then a little bit later on, we did with a different person down in Shreveport. We bought a 98 unit property in Shreveport. Then a 140 unit property in Shreveport, 150 unit property in Jackson, Mississippi, another 120 unit in Nacogdoches, Texas, and been going like gangbusters ever since. Me and my partners have owned over 2,100 units. Most of them have been apartments, but we also own 40 units at a hotel in Belize called Mahogany Bay Resort. It's actually a Hilton hotel. So if you go to the Hilton website and look up Mahogany Bay Resort in Belize, you'll find that down there. So we own about 20 to 25% of the rental units that are available at the hotel. And we also own some agricultural investments down in Paraguay. I've got 15 or 16 short-term rental units down in Memphis. So done a little bit of everything. Even owned a casino for a while, many, many years ago. And one of the reasons I'm doing this with James is because George and I, when we met, it was actually at a seminar on how to do what's called platform selling, where you get up and you teach people something. And sometimes people would teach people something about their health, or like chiropractors could do presentations on why you should see a chiropractor or why you should eat better. And of course, back then, this was in the early 2000s, real estate was really hot. and we really liked apartment or real estate investing. So we decided to start doing real estate investment classes. Our first one was on fix and flips, or not fix and flips, but finding foreclosures. And I just realized that, it was a good class, but there's 20, 30 people out there teaching about finding foreclosures and doing fix and flips. What else could we do? Well, George had some experience with apartments. I had none. So we started doing apartments, and I learned from George pretty much on the job training as we went, and started buying apartments, and then turned that into a 1-day workshop, and then a 3-day boot camp, and now a 4-day boot camp. And I keep doing it because literally I've been retired since 97. But I keep doing it because I love to travel and I love to teach. So I combined the two different things together, and apartments stuck because they were bigger paychecks. They kept coming in. It was pretty much the same amount of work to buy a 20-unit or 100-unit apartment complex as it was a single-family home. The other nice part about buying larger apartment complexes is I don't have to worry about managing them. Matter of fact, even smaller complexes, even our one single-family homes and condos, there's only a couple that I manage, and those are right here in Colorado, and they're pretty much turnkey. That's the only reason I do it. So I have professional managers manage all the properties, so I can go out and do what I love to do rather than worry about managing those properties. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. So I've been doing this training for over 20 years now. I've trained thousands of people how to successfully go out and buy apartments and mobile home parks and storage facilities and RV parks and you name it from a commercial perspective. And I've got students that have gone out and bought something. All right. So, James, was there anything I missed? Anything you remember from my past that I can share?
That was great. I did want to chime in and mention to everybody that feel free to take notes. Feel free to take pictures of the screen. If we, like Anthony mentioned, a couple of resources, books, people that he met, take that information, write that in your notes, and then go after this webinar, go look everything up. We give these resources. If it's worked for us or it's worked for Anthony, that's why we're putting that out there so that y'all can know about it too. So again, if there's any resources or books or anything that is mentioned on here, feel free to write it down and go look it up later.
Yep. So thanks, James.
Tell us why we're in the best time to buy right now.
Yeah. Well, another quick question for everybody so I can get in there and talk about that. How many of you, so tell me either, yes, you've already bought some type of an apartment complex or commercial property, 5 units and greater. It could be an apartment complex, could be a mobile home park. If you're just getting started and you just want to learn more, just put in the chat that you're here to learn more. Because I want to get a feel for kind of everybody's level. Because if everybody here owns some type of apartment complex, there's a lot of shortcuts that I can go through, or not shortcuts, but I can bypass some information and get right to the guts of it. Okay. Newbie, here to learn more. Yes. So I'm assuming yes means you've got that. Jacqueline, she'll be in Houston. Thank you, Jacqueline. That's excellent. She'll be coming to the boot camp next week. That is next week. Wow. 8 days, 7 days from today, 9 days from today. Single family. Okay, so most of you are here to learn more. Okay, excellent. So that tells me where I need to start, which is kind of at the beginning. So the reason I asked the question is because a lot of people aren't aware that loans for apartment complexes generally have a balloon, meaning that even though you can get a loan that might be amortized over a full 30 years, and the payments are structured as if you're going to be making payments over 30 years, the loans actually balloon, meaning you have to pay them back usually in 3, 5, 7, 10 years. So in most cases, you don't get to go to that full 30 years. And one of the reasons banks do that was two main reasons. Number one, most people that buy larger apartment complexes like I do, they're used to us coming in and wanting to get rid of those properties every 5 to 10 years, because then what we do is we take the equity from that property and we move it into a bigger property. a larger property in order to make more money. And then 5 to 10 years later, we take the money from that and move it to another larger property. So we're always leveling up. So that's one of the reasons banks typically have their loans balloon. Of course, the other reason is purely selfish reasons, because if they have the loans balloon every 5 to 10 years, that means that A, they get their money back faster, and B, if you do refinance it, usually with the same bank, because if you have a good track record for paying the loan, then what will happen is the bank will come back to you when the loan is getting ready to balloon, and they'll tell you, it's like, hey, you know, Roger, if you want to redo this loan, we'll be more than happy to refinance it for you because your 5 years is up. And then what do they get? They get all the legal fees, they get the loan origination fee, they get all the processing fees, right? They make all that money all over again. So unlike a single family home, most of your commercial loans are going to balloon somewhere between 3 and 10 years. The majority of them are 5 to 10 years. So even though I said 3, 5, 7, 10, there's some that balloon in 9, majority of them are going to be anywhere from 5 to 10 years. And what I mean balloon is, right, you have to pay the loan back. And there's 2 ways you can pay the loan back. You can either refinance the property and keep it for another 5 or 10 years, or you can sell the property. And again, generally, people in my position were generally selling the property and then doing a 1031 exchange into a much larger property. As a matter of fact, later on, if you remind me, James, if we still have time, I can go through and do the presentation, that part of the presentation that I did at your Houston RIA, where I showed taking the money from property to property over a 20-year period. I think for most people here, if you have limited experience, that would probably blow your mind instead of just letting your money sit in a property. So the reason I wanted to talk about balloons is because back in 2020 and 2021, interest rates for commercial loans were running around 3.5% to 4%. Well, we all remember, hopefully you remember if you've been doing this long enough, what happened in 2022. Well, 2022, interest rates went from 4% to 8%. Now they've come down a little bit. Matter of fact, one of the lenders that I regularly get emails from, it's usually once a week, they'll send me what's called a term sheet that shows me where interest rates are. They have come down to around 6.5%-ish. So they've come down a little bit, but it's definitely not back at the 4% range or the 3.5% range. But the reason this is significant is because people that took out loans in 2021 at 3.5% to 4% that have a 5-year balloon, what year is it? Right? This is the 5th year. This is 2026. The 5th year, and then of course 2027 is also going to be a banner year because interest rates went up in 2022. So about halfway through 2022 is when interest rates started going through the roof from 4% to 8%. So a lot of these owners that bought properties back in 2021 and early 2022 with the 3.5% to 4% interest rate, their loans, a lot of those loans are ballooning this year. There's another chunk of them that will balloon 10 years out. So in 2031 and 2032, you're going to have another wave of properties that are coming through that are going to balloon. Now, we don't know 5-6 years out what's going to happen to interest rates out that far, but right now we know interest rates have dropped a little bit. Sorry, my dog has been hiding under my desk because of thunderstorms, so she just decided to get up and go out. We don't know what's going to happen with interest rates in 5 years, but right now we know that they are dropping a little bit, but they're still not back down where they were. So a lot of owners are literally caught in a catch-22. One of their options is to refinance their property and keep it for another 5 or 10 years. Well, in order to do that, and hopefully you'll be able to get my hand gestures here, in order to do that, they may have to do one of 2 things. So if they've increased the value of their property the way that they should have over the last 5 years, they might be okay. They might be able just to refinance it. And if they can do that, their loan payments are going to be higher than they were 5 years ago because the interest rates have gone up by over 50%. Because if they were at 4 and now they're at 6.5, right? That's over a 50% increase. That's almost what, a 60-70% increase in the interest rate, which means their monthly payments are going to go up. Now they may be able to, they may be okay with that, and they'll just have to suffer by taking less cash flow. The other thing that they might have to do, well, 2 things. Number one is, and this is where you can benefit, is the bank has an LTV requirement. So let's say it's 75%. So the purchase price was here, their 75% loan was here. The other thing that happens as well is they have what's called the debt service coverage ratio. So with the debt service coverage ratio, not only does the property have to be able to cash flow in such a way to be able to make the monthly mortgage payment, but there also has to be a cushion on top of that, because the bank doesn't want you breaking even or struggling each month. So generally they want to see at least a 25% cushion. So if their monthly mortgage payment was, let's say, $2,000 a month, and by the way, when I talk about mortgage payments for commercial property, mortgage payments are only principal and interest. Even though you might send in taxes and insurance as part of that payment, just like a single family home, when we're talking about the numbers of the debt service coverage ratio and the cushion and things like that, that's just principal and interest. The taxes and insurance, sure, those are operating expenses. We analyze those a little bit differently. But so as an example, when I made the comment about a $2,000 a month payment, well, $2,000 a month, that's just enough to cover the payment. But if you need a 25% cushion, what's 25% of 2,000? Right? It's another $500, which means they have to have a net operating income left over. So once they get in all the income from all the rents, minus the vacancy, plus other income for things like late fees, pet fees, forfeited security deposits, utility reimbursements, they get what's called effective gross income. From the effective gross income, you take out your operating expenses, things like your property taxes, insurance, your management fees, maintenance and repairs, utilities, reserve costs, right? You take all those things out. Then you have your net operating income. So from the net operating income, you then, of course, subtract out your mortgage payment and what's left over. So you better have at least $2,500 of net operating income each month, because that will allow you to make your monthly mortgage payment of $2,000. That would give you that 25% cushion left over. Now, it's not going to be perfect, right? You're not going to always have exactly 1.25, what's called a 1.25 DCR with the 25% cushion. It's going to fluctuate each and every month. But on average, over a 12-month period, you have to have at least a 25% cushion with most lenders. So that $2,000 a month is, of course, $24,000 per year. And then 25% of that, which is what, another $6,000? No, $3,000, right? So you have to have an extra $3,000 left over at the end of the year. That also goes into your pocket in the form of cash flow. So that's on a regular loan. Well, what happens if your interest rate just went up by over 50% from 4 to 6.5? Now all of a sudden that cushion, right? That cushion could be gone. So there's two options that a seller has, or that an owner has. They can sell the property in order to get out of it, so then they don't have to worry about the cushion or the lower cash flow. Or the other option, if they do want to refinance it, they might have to actually put more money down, because if the value of the property has dropped to a point where you don't want to pay them what the amount that they want for the property, and this is happening a lot around the country, right? Sellers want this much for the property, and when we analyze it, it's only worth this. Well, some sellers don't want to come down that little bit in order to get the deal done. Well, then their only option is to refinance it and then take less cash flow. The problem is, if they don't have that 25% cushion, the only way that they're going to get that 25% cushion is by then coming out of their own pocket and putting more money down on a property they already own in order to lower the LTV. And when you lower the LTV, you lower your monthly debt service. And by lowering the monthly debt service, you then increase the amount of available cushion that you have in order to qualify for the loan. So I know this isn't the best learning technique or training tool by using my hands, but hopefully you're getting an idea for it. And in a little bit, what we'll do is I'll actually put up one of the underwriting tools that I use. Is called my quick analysis software. And I can show you in the quick analysis software one of the situations that's going on, so you can actually see it in number form instead of me just doing something like this, because that's ultimately what's going to happen with these deals. Is sellers are going to be in a pinch. And we actually are seeing some owners who are willing to drop their purchase price or their offering price anywhere from 10 to 15 to 20%, in some cases 25%, in order to get the deal done, which means those sellers are motivated to sell and get out of that property. But there's also some that are not willing to drop their price, which means their only other option is to refinance. Now, if they've increased the value of the property enough, they might be able to refinance it as is, not have to put any more money into it, and then just suffer with lower cash flow. But it still has enough cushion in it that the bank is willing to refinance that property for them. So this is what's going on this year and next year is you've got all these owners whose loans are going to be ballooning, and they're going to be looking for a solution. Whatever that solution is for them. For some of them, it will be to lower the price and get out, which is where you benefit. Other people are just going to take the hit and take lower cash flow and refinance it. Other people are going to take a double whammy, and they might have to, again, throw more money at it to lower the amount of money that they're borrowing in order to get that cushion that the bank needs and requires them to have on their deals. Whew. Did that help, James?
That helped a lot. Yeah, that was great information, guys. As we're going through this, if Anthony says something that you like or it hits home to you, give it the thumbs up, give it the heart. We see those pop up on the screen, and it helps us keep going. We are going to get to a deal here in a few minutes that you were mentioning earlier that you just looked at in Tennessee, a 16-unit deal.
Yep.
But beforehand, I got like a two-part question. I want to ask you a little bit about what are some common mistakes to avoid as a newer investor or somebody that's just starting to focus on multifamily and commercial. But before you address the common mistakes to avoid, concerning apartments, is there like a sweet spot or something like in the number of units? Should somebody new just start focusing on like maybe 12 doors, 20 doors, 40 doors? What should be a good target, for that?
Okay. Well, ideally, the best properties overall for me are anything 80 units and above. And I know some of you are thinking, well, gee, I only own a single family home, or I don't even own a single family home yet. And now you're talking about buying 80 to 100 units. Well, what it really comes down to is, first off, you do need the experience. So if you only have one or two single family homes, you're not going to be going out by yourself and buying an 80 unit or higher apartment complex. But it doesn't mean you can't. What it means is that you have to come up with the right partners and the right structure so that you have people on your team that have experience that will satisfy the bank's requirement for experience. You have to have people on the team that have enough net worth to satisfy the bank's lending requirements. And you also, it doesn't have to be your money. You can raise money from other people, but you need to raise it the right way so that you don't go to the Gray Bar Hotel, because I'm not going to come visit you every other Wednesday. So you need to make sure you're raising money the right way. But the reason I bring up that the ideal is 80 units and higher is because with 80 units and higher, the property usually will support having your own full-time on-site manager and maintenance person. And you're generally going to have one manager and one maintenance person for every 100 units. So somewhere around 70 or 80-ish units, you can have a full-time on-site manager and a full-time on-site maintenance person. You get up around 120, 150, depending on the quality of the property. You don't have to hire another full-time person, but you could hire a part-time leasing person that works under the manager. You could also hire another part-time maintenance person to work with your maintenance staff, or your full-time maintenance person. And then once you get above 160, 170 units, now you're going to need two full-time people. So you have two full-time managers. They're not both managers. One would be a manager. Again, the other one would be either an assistant manager or a leasing agent. And then two full-time maintenance people. Certainly below that, you can absolutely, I'm sorry, let me step back. So you made the comment about what's the best size of complex for someone. The reason I brought up the larger units, it ultimately comes down to whether or not you want to do this by yourself or you want to do this with partners. If you're okay doing this with partners, you can go for a 100-unit property or more if you're willing to partner with other people. But I do have some people that I know that only want to buy properties themselves. They don't want other partners. They just want to do it themselves. And that's fine too. But then my answer changes, because if you only want to do it yourself, then it does come down to your experience and how much experience you have buying and managing or operating a rental property, whether it's single family homes, condos, smaller multifamilies. By the way, 4 units and under is a multifamily. So a duplex, triplex, and fourplex are multifamily, but they're not apartments. Apartments start at 5 units and up. Why 5 units and up? Because at 5 units and up, that's when lenders consider that to be a commercial property. So 5 units and up is what we call an apartment. 4 units and less, we still just call a straight residential property. The other distinction too is that 4 units and less, that loan is typically going to go on your credit report because it is a consumer loan and consumer debt. 5 units and up, because that's a commercial loan, does not show up on your credit report. So another bonus to buying 5 units or more. But back to the experience. So if you want to do this yourself, what kind of experience do you have? If you have 1 or 2 rental properties and you want to buy a 10-plex, probably not going to be an issue. You want to buy a 20, 30, 50-plex, it might be an issue, right? It gets to be a little gray area. The other thing you have to look at, and what banks are going to require of most people, is they want to make sure that you have adequate reserves after you close on the property. And that means that if whatever your loan is, so let's say you buy $1 million property and you get a 75% LTV loan. So 75% LTV loan on $1 million property, you're borrowing $750,000. Your lenders will typically want to see that you have a net worth of at least $750,000. Because that way, if you fall apart and can't pay them back for that $750,000 loan, they can come after you and take that $750,000 out of your net worth in order to get their money back. Now, hopefully they don't need all of that. If things go sideways, maybe they only have to take $100,000 or $200,000. Hopefully that doesn't happen to you. But that's one of the things they look at, is generally you have to have a net worth equal to or greater than the loan balance. So again, if you're buying $1 million property, get a $750,000 loan, and you have $750,000 of net worth, great. If you don't, now you're going to have to scale back and buy something smaller, or you're going to have to be open to bringing in another partner or two, because the banks will let you combine partners and your net worths to qualify for those loans. So again, it really comes down to the smaller stuff. If you're okay with partnering, the sky's the limit. But if you don't want to partner with other people, then you have to look at your experience, your net worth, and you also have to look at your monetary reserves, because after you close on the property, so after your 25% down payment and after your closing cost, you still need somewhere between 10 and 20% of the loan balance, or somewhere between 6 and 12 months of the monthly loan payments available in reserves, meaning liquid reserves. So checking account, savings account. They would even look at a stock portfolio. They wouldn't look at the whole stock portfolio. They might take 50% of that. If you have money sitting in other stocks and bonds, mutual funds, something like that, right? That all adds up, and it's something that you can convert to cash within a day or two. Okay. So what was the first part of your question? Because you did one question, and then you had me answer this first, and now I forgot the first question.
What are some common mistakes for newer investors to avoid?
So one of the common mistakes is not having adequate reserves that we just talked about. I found out the hard way from one of my partners who I thought, well, I didn't think, he did have a lot more experience than me when I started partnering with him way back in the late 2000s. And I come to find out on one of our properties that we had an issue. We actually had a rainstorm that came through, and it actually took out the foundation on one of our buildings. And these were seven unit buildings, and we had, I don't know, 8 or 10 of them. Let's see, 770. No, we had like 16 or 17 of these 7-unit buildings, and they were all 7 units. And well, the water washed out of the corner of one, so the 2 units on the very end did that. It washed it out, and literally you could actually see it wasn't that dramatic, but it would happen to be the very first building as you came off the freeway and turned onto the frontage road to come right to our apartment. The very first building you could see over on the left-hand side, the 2 units were actually had separated from the other 5 units and were sitting sideways. So when I called my partner called to tell me what was going on. I asked him, well, how much do we have? How much would insurance cover it? Or how much would the insurance cover? And he said, we didn't have insurance on it because it was a flood issue and he didn't have flood insurance, which made no sense to me because we had a creek running through the middle of the property and he decided not to pay the $10,000 a year for flood insurance. Well, we had 3 buildings that were damaged at $40,000 each. So that's $120,000. And I asked him, I said, how's that $10,000 lack of investment looking now? So we literally had those issues until we sold the property. We didn't fix the building that broke off until a couple months before we sold it because the new buyer required that as part of the sale that had to be fixed before they would close. So we just left it sitting like that for 4 years. It was horrible. But the other thing that I asked him too was, well, how much do we have in reserves? And he's like, reserves? We don't have any reserves. I'm not going to let money sit in reserves. I'm going to send that money back to our investors to keep our investors happy. It's like, that's one of the biggest mistakes you can do. I mean, there's nothing wrong with paying your investors. Your investors want to be paid back. But the worst thing you can do is not have a reserve account for the benefit of giving your investors returns. Because something like this is going to happen when you own these properties. You're going to need that extra money. So you need to, the biggest thing you can have is not having adequate reserves. Another mistake would be not having adequate insurance. Matter of fact, a couple things that I'll tell you about that you need to have for insurance that you may or may not even know that you need for single-family homes. One is lost rent coverage. Lost rent coverage. So if you have a covered claim, the bank will continue to pay you as if those units are still occupied. So if you have a 20-unit building and all 20 units are occupied and it burns to the ground, they will keep paying you for a period of time, hopefully at least a year, if not longer, until you get it rebuilt and get those units reoccupied, because you still need to make your mortgage payment. If you have investors, quite frankly, I would suspend payments to the investors if you have that type of a catastrophic claim. But you still need to make sure, if you have the money, that you can pay your investors, but you also want to make sure that money continues to come in so you can make your mortgage payment. The other thing you have to understand, though, is if you have a 20-unit building and at the time of the disaster, only 18 of the units are occupied, they will only pay you for the 18 units that were occupied, not the 2 that were not occupied, because they weren't occupied at the time that the claim happened. Another big piece of insurance that I would recommend you have is something called ordinance and law. Ordinance and law coverage. So ordinance and law covers any change to the code from the time the property was built until the time of the claim. So I'll give you an example. We had some students who forgot to get ordinance and law coverage, and they had a fire in one of their apartment buildings. Well, the fire department went in, chopped a hole in the roof, sprayed water down inside, and right when drywall gets wet, it all gets soggy and it all falls apart. Well, what they did in order to redo the units is they came in, and the first thing they did is they went up there with these hooks and they pulled down all the drywall. Then an inspector comes in because they're getting ready to put the drywall back up. They had finished some of the other work in the unit. They were getting ready to put the drywall up. The inspector looks up in the ceiling and sees that the joists or trusses are on what are called 24-inch centers, which means it's 24 inches from in between each joists. Well, the new code is 16 inches. So since they didn't have ordinance and law, they had to pay to put in extra trusses in order to meet the new code. So that came out of their pocket. If they had ordinance and law coverage would have then paid to have those extra trusses put up due to the coverage that they had claimed. Depending on one of the coverage that I'll talk about is if you're in a really rough area where there's problems with residents, and hopefully you're not buying in really rough areas, but we did, unbeknownst to us. is we had something called A and B insurance. A and B stands for assault and battery. And it came in handy a couple of times because we had a couple of shootings on one of our properties. The funny part is that both shootings involved people that were not even our residents. They didn't even live at the property. But because it happened on our property, other people that were connected to the people that were part of the shooting sued us for not providing adequate security on the property, which somehow is why they got shot, even though they shouldn't have been on our property. So the people that got shot and the people that were doing the shooting, neither of them lived there, but they sued us anyway. So the nice part about A and B coverage, if you're in an area like that, is I don't even know what happened to it. We just turned it over to our insurance company, and our insurance company took care of it. I don't know if it became a lawsuit. I don't know if they just paid them off just to get them to go away. But that came in handy. Other things that I would say that people will make mistakes on is they don't do adequate due diligence. I, in the past, have had issues where I didn't do adequate due diligence, and I learned dearly from those mistakes because I assumed that the people that were giving me information were trustworthy, and come to find out that they were trustworthy, but they were not. I didn't quite understand the information that they were giving me and where it was coming from. I thought it was coming from a trusted source. They thought it was coming from a trusted source. It turned out it wasn't. And because of that, we actually ended up losing a property to foreclosure way back in the early 2010s, 2010, 2011, because of the misinformation that was handled. So don't be afraid to do really good, deep due diligence and ask a lot of questions. And if you don't understand some type of documentation or information that you're being provided, ask somebody. Don't necessarily ask the person that gave it to you because they potentially have, to use a cliche, a dog in the hunt. So you want to make sure you have people on your team, your CPA, your attorney. If you have a buyer's agent, as long as that buyer's agent does not also work for the seller's company, that might be a good source. There's a bunch of different databases that you can go to verify information. There's CoStar. There's Axiometrics. There's ALN Data. There's Reis, REIS.com. And one other one is Crexi, CREXI.com. Whew, okay.
Y'all liking this? Are y'all having fun? I've seen a couple of reactions, but come on, we need more. Come on, we got to keep this going. Awesome. There they go. There they go. Woo. Keep them coming. All right. So to answer my question, we do have a few questions coming through the chat, but I do want to save those till the end. And again, like I said, we'll allow you guys to unmute and ask your questions. Do you want to go into the 16 unit deal? And do you want to share your screen and share that? Yeah. And then maybe also share a little bit about the boot camp coming up?
Sure. So here's the 16 unit. This was actually brought, for those of you that came to my one-day workshop I did in Houston, I did a one-day workshop this past weekend in Denver. And this was a unit that somebody brought. So this is my quick analysis software. There are 6 columns. There's a pro forma column. Pro forma means projected, guesstimated, bullshit, whatever you want to call it, is pro forma. Then there are actual numbers. So one of the things that you'll notice on different deals that you find on the internet or from brokers is they will either give you actual numbers or it might say current numbers. So if it says actual or current, they're actual. If it doesn't, they're probably pro forma. And sometimes they give you both numbers, which is even better because then you can take their actual numbers over here and the pro forma numbers and put those over here and do a side-by-side comparison. Then there are 4 what-if columns. So if I slide this over, you'll see the 4th column there, which we actually didn't use for this particular property, but there's 4 what-if columns. So on these what-if columns, I'll show you what we did. So if you notice on the first 2, by the way, let me go through the actual numbers first, and then we'll talk about the other ones. So with the actual numbers, the seller's 16 units in Tennessee, they're asking $1.75 million. They said that their gross income was $191,000. $191,040. They said they had no vacancy, so we put in 0. They said they had no other income, so we put in 0. They said they had 61,136 for expenses. Now, one of the first things I teach my students, and I taught this to the student that brought this deal, is before you even plug these numbers in, the first thing you have to understand is, are all the numbers that you need included? So the acronym that I teach is TIMMUR, Timmur, TIMMUR. So TIMMUR stands for taxes, as in property taxes, insurance, management, maintenance and repairs, utilities, and then reserves. So, James, can you still hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Okay, because you're the only picture I could see, and it didn't look like you were moving again. So I want to make sure I didn't get too far and find out that you're locked up. Oh, my doggy's back. There must be more thunderstorms. Oh, different doggy. Never mind. So the first thing you do is when you look at the documentation that the seller or the seller's agent gives you, is before you even worry about the numbers, I try and teach people mentally, just look to see if all 6 major categories are there. So don't even worry about what the numbers say. Just look to see, is there a line item for taxes, insurance, management, maintenance and repairs, utilities, and reserves. So on this particular property, everything was there except for reserves. Now, technically, reserves are not an expense until you actually spend the money. But I know at some point I'm probably going to be spending that money. So what I do on my quick analysis is if the seller does not give me or show a reserve amount, I just add in a base minimum. My base minimum is $300 per unit per year. So that's what we did here between what if 1 and what if 2, is we went from the 61,136 to 65,936. So if you notice up here, let me double click on this. It'll be bigger for everybody to see. So what I did is we took $300 times 16 units, which is 4,800. We turned this into a formula. So we kept our original number of 61,136. So I said this equals that number plus another 4,800. So we did that. Our expenses jumped to 65,936. Okay. The other thing you notice here is I never utilize a 0 vacancy rate. The absolute minimum I'm going to use is 5%. So we went over here. We also made an adjustment to 5%. Down here on the numbers, if we keep going down, the next check that we make is on line 8. Line 8 shows the cap rate that the property is being sold at. Now, for those of you that don't know what cap rate is the return you would get on the property if you bought it all cash. So what this is saying is if you do the math and take our net operating income, which is right here, which is $129,904, and divide it by the asking price, right? So if we paid $1,750,000 in cash, and at the end of year 1, we had $129,000, almost $130,000 left over, it would be like getting a return of 7.4%. And sure enough, on the offering memorandum that the student had, it showed that their listed cap rate was 7.42%. So we were right on line with what they were showing on their particular document. Now, not all offering memorandums will show a listed cap rate like that for you to match it up. But if it does, you want to double check it and make sure that they do match. So these did, but we also know that we have some errors that we need to fix, right? We know that the 0 vacancy is not acceptable. We also know that this number was missing reserves, but we went down and we finished up this column before we moved over to the other columns, just so I could teach the students how I go through this process. So we did put in a 75% LTV loan. Because of the fact that we did the 75% and the loan amount came out above $1 million, I know that this loan qualifies for what's called a Fannie Mae small balance loan. Their small balance loans run from 1 to 7 million. How many of you would like a small balance loan of $7 million? Yeah, that's a small balance loan. And by the way, that's a loan. That's not the property, how much you paid for the property. That's just the loan amount. So we know this qualifies for a Fannie Mae small balance loan. So currently what's going on with interest rates and with Fannie Mae is I'm pretty sure on this property they could probably get a 6.25% interest rate amortized over a full 30 years. Now, even though it's amortized over 30 years, it's going to balloon. As I mentioned at the very beginning of the webinar, it's going to be amortized as if they were paying it over 30 years. So the monthly payments would be divvied up as if they were making 360 payments, but they're not going to get there. This loan is going to balloon in 10 years. So in 10 years, they're either going to have to refinance this loan or sell the property in order to pay the loan back. So based on that information, our monthly payments will be about $8,100. And again, that's principal and interest only, because taxes and insurance are up here in our expense number, right? Remember, the expense number is taxes, insurance, management, maintenance and repairs, utilities, and reserves. All right. So if we come down here to the bottom part of the software, we figure out whether or not the deal makes any sense. So we already know that there's some errors above that we need to fix. But just to get a quick look at this, one of the things I want to look at is what's the before tax cash flow. And this is not, when it says before tax, that's not before property taxes. That's before your income taxes that you're going to pay on any distributions. So my rule of thumb is I want to see an absolute minimum of at least $1,000 per unit per year, just to go from this process here to putting in an offer. Now, I want to see the cash flow be even higher than that, but my absolute minimum to even be interested in putting in an offer needs to be at least $1,000 per unit. So since this is 16 units, line 14 has to be at least $16,000. So that's a thumbs up, right? It's $2,500 higher, so we're good to go. Unfortunately, remember earlier I talked about the cushion, and we wanted a 25% cushion. That's what line 15 is. That's your debt service coverage ratio, also known as DSCR. Well, that's only coming in at a 19% cushion. So the 1, if you have a 1 for your DCR, that means you're breaking even and you have enough money to cover the debt service. Everything greater than 1 is the cushion. So in this case, we have 19% more than we're paying the lender left over going in our pocket as cushion. So if you did the math, you'd see that $18,576 is 19% of $96,975. So this is not enough because most banks want to see a DCR of at least 1.25. So right there, I know I have an issue. Well, we already knew we had issues from above anyway. And then down here is our cash on cash return. Well, our cash on cash return, some people might look at that and say that's pretty low, which it is. But based on what you're getting from a bank today, that's still a pretty decent return. It's not where I want it to be. But if you had, by the way, this line right here, line 17, is showing us that in order to buy this property, you're going to have to come up with about $490,000. Now, you're going to need a little more than that for reserves and things like that to pre-fund your reserves account for taxes and insurance, and possibly even for maintenance and repairs, depending on your lender. But even if we said that had to be $550,000, or we wanted to be really conservative and throw it up to $600,000, the 3.8% cash on cash return, a lot of people would look at that and say, well, that's horrible. Well, it's definitely not the greatest, but here's your option. If you had $550,000 or $600,000 sitting in a bank account, would you let that money just sit in the bank account making 0.2, 0.3, 0.5%? Or would you pull it out and put it in this deal if the other numbers were good? So first off, I know the other numbers aren't good, so this is kind of a rhetorical question because I'm not pulling my money out based on what I'm seeing so far. But when you look at the 3.8%, if the numbers were good, you get more. You get far more than the 3.8% because the 3.8% is just your cash on cash return. That's one of 4 things that you're going to be measuring. So how do you actually make money on the property? 1 is through cash flow. 3.8%, not a big deal, but it's better than 0.5% coming from a bank or even 1% coming from a bank. Plus, on top of that, you make money through appreciation. you make money from depreciation, and you make money from the equity buildup, which is your renters paying you rent so you can pay the monthly mortgage payment, which takes your mortgage payment down over a period of time. So those are the 4 different ways that you can grow your wealth by owning apartment buildings or any type of real estate. So when you take the 3.8 plus all those other 3 things, you could be in the 18 to 25% return range for your total return on investment. So those are some pretty decent numbers when you look beyond just the one cash on cash return. Now, however, right, cash on cash return is now, right? Cash on cash return is what you're getting right now for cash flow that you can use to pay your own personal bills, to pay your own personal mortgage payment, to pay for your own car payment, your food, your shelter, your clothing, your education, and things like that. But we know this deal has issues, so we didn't stop here. We dug into it a little bit further. So that's where What If 1 comes in. So we went into What If 1 with the students in the class, and we said, okay, let's make some adjustments. So first off, we're going to start very simply. We're going to keep the price the same. We're going to keep the income the same. But now what we're going to do is we're going to add 5% for a minimum of vacancy. We also, as I mentioned, there were no reserves, so we took the reserves up by $4,800. If you remember that from earlier, right? We took it up $4,800. And whoops. And then now, if you notice, our cap rate is no longer 7.42. We're now buying it. We're now getting a lower rate of return if we bought the property cash, because our net operating income is no longer $130,000. It's now dropped to $115,500. So that's why our return here has dropped from 7.4 to 6.6. So not going in the right direction. The other thing you'll notice, though, I forgot to explain this earlier on line 9. By the way, with this software, you can change anything that's in bright yellow. You can't change things that are not bright yellow because they're formulas. So if I came up here and I wanted to change my 36%, and just for the heck of it, I wanted to put in, let's say 45%, if I hit a number, my computer's going to ding at me and it's going to come up with an error saying, please stop doing that. The cell is locked. So if I want to put in a number like 45%, I then come down here to this bright yellow box and I can put in 45%, because this is what we call an OR box. You can put in the number as a dollar or as a percentage. Now, if you notice here, I put this at 45%, but this number didn't change. That's because I need to delete this number so that the 45% takes over. So it went from 36% to 45%. So just want to show you how this worked. Let me take this back. Sorry, hang on a sec. Okay. So right here, if we bought the property for all cash, our return now dropped from 7.4 to 6.6 because our cash flow dropped. Why did our cash flow drop? Well, because we actually probably have and will have vacancy, because on a 16-unit property, there's a good chance that either somebody just won't pay rent 1 month or a couple of months, or that somebody's going to move out and then somebody else has to move in. Well, you're not going to have somebody move out at 8 a.m. and somebody move in at 5 p.m. on the same day. It's usually going to take you anywhere from a couple of days to a couple of weeks to a month to find somebody to reoccupy the unit. So there is going to be some type of vacancy during that time period. We also added in the extra reserves here for our on our expenses. And then on line 9, what I started to say earlier is on line 9, this is where you get to go in and put in the cap rate for the market. So regardless of what the seller is telling you they're selling it at, what are other similar properties selling at what cap rate? In other words, what kind of return are other people like me looking to get from that particular area of the country? So if that number was 6%, that means, number one, that if these numbers here were accurate in the actual column, we'd buy the property for 1.75 and the property is already worth 2.165. So what, almost $400,000 more. Well, we know that's not accurate because we know that this column had issues with the numbers, right? There was no vacancy and the expenses were too low. But if we come over here with more realistic numbers, now we're looking at a property that we could buy for 1.75, but within a year, or literally at the time we buy it, it could be worth over 1.9. So we could gain over $150,000 if these numbers are accurate. No, by the way, when are we actually going to prove that these numbers are accurate? It's not going to be before we put in an offer. Because if you try and prove these numbers with the seller before you put in an offer, you're never going to put in an offer, because most sellers will not give you good quality information about their property until you're under contract. So this is where a lot of newbies get stuck, because it's the old what's called the catch-22. You want to put in an offer, but you don't want to put in an offer unless you have good numbers to analyze. But they won't give you the numbers to analyze them until you put in an offer. But you can't put in an offer until they give you good numbers to analyze, but they won't give you the numbers to analyze until you put in an offer. So the problem is, what do? A lot of people would just say, screw this, and they walk away because they can't get good numbers. Don't do that. Take them at their word for it based on, and you can ask more questions too. You can say, look, first off, the information you gave me showed 0 vacancy. There's no way that my lender is going to underwrite this at 0. They're telling me to use a minimum of 5%. So I added in 5%. I also noticed in your numbers that there were no reserves. So I added in extra money for reserves. Okay. So when I did that, my NOI dropped from your NOI of 130,000 to 115.5. So based on that, the value of the property is, now you don't have to tell them this, that the property, the value according to your numbers is 1.9 million, because they're only asking 1.75. So here's what I would recommend that you do. At this point, I would put in a full price offer, and I'm going to show you later on why. It's not just because of what we're seeing here, it's because of what I'm going to show you below, that we're going to put in an offer. But ultimately, in order to get those good numbers, you have to put in an offer and get under contract, and then that's when the due diligence starts. And part of what you're going to ask for in the due diligence is the profit and loss statement, their tax returns for the last 2 to 3 years for the property, their bank statements for the last 2 to 3 years for the property, things called rent rolls, tenant ledgers. You're going to do a physical inspection of the property, right? All of that happens in due diligence. So if you're waiting for them to give you good numbers and they say they won't until you put in an offer, just go ahead and put in the offer, but make sure the offer is written in a way that if the information that they told you at this point in the process does not match and they cannot prove the information that they give you during due diligence, you cancel the deal, get your earnest money back, and go find another property. Or better yet, before you do that, see if you can renegotiate, or the term you'll hear in the industry is retrade. See if you can retrade the deal with the current seller. Because sometimes if they understand that if you pull out and walk away because they gave you bad data at this point, based on your analysis, they're going to go through the same thing all over again with somebody else. So why not continue to work with you, and maybe you can get a better price and better terms so that you can continue to go through and buy this property. So let's go down through our numbers a little bit more. So we have the same loan term, 75% loan, 6.25% interest amortized over 30 years. Let's go look at our numbers. And, what did I change here? Oh, you know what? We were looking at the what if column earlier when I gave you that information instead of the actual column. So based on the actual column, I apologize for that. Based on the actual column, these numbers actually do work, and they work well, except we knew that we were missing data. So now that we put in the missing data, we know that our cash flow still works because it's still greater than $1,000 per unit per year. So that needs to be, this needs to be at least 16,000, which is it is. This needs to be at least 1.25, which it's not, so that's a red flag. And then this, to me, even though it's better than leaving the money in a bank, it still doesn't work because we have to come up with more money, either a lower purchase price, or we have to put down a larger down payment to get our debt service coverage ratio up so that the bank would actually give us a loan on this property. So now the deal went in the toilet, right? So it went from what could have been a good deal, missing information, to now putting in the missing information, to now the deal doesn't work. So how do we get the deal to work? So we went over here to what if 2, and all we did, actually in class, what I did the first time in class is I just took this down by 50,000. Oops. Wrong box. Hang on. So in the class, I took this down to 1.7 million. I left everything else the same. The rental income was the same, vacancy was the same, expenses were the same. Right now, because we're buying it hopefully for $50,000 less, our cap rate went up to 6.8. We have the same loan amount, but our monthly payments have dropped because we're paying $50,000 less. Now what happened to our numbers? Well, our cash flow went up, so that got greener. Our DCR is still not at 1.25, so that still doesn't work. And the student who was doing this deal said that she wanted at least a 6% return. So that was a red flag for her because it wasn't at least 6% cash on cash. So very quickly, we just went back to the top, said, okay, that didn't work. Let's try 1.65. So we did 1,650,000. We just brought it down another $50,000. Let's see what happens there, right? Everything else stayed exactly the same. Now look at our numbers. Our cash flow got even better. Now we're literally at about $1,500, $1,600 per unit per year instead of 1,000. Our DCR is above 1.25. So, right, that's now a green light. But we're still here. We're still a little low. She would like to see this at least at 6, and we're just over 5. So for her, that was marginal. But then what we did is we took the last column. We went in and we took the seller's information based on what we thought they thought we could get for rent, which was $1,250 per unit. That's this number right here. Over here, this 191,040, they're currently only getting $995. So the seller said, or the seller's agent said, the market rate is $1,250. So on the cursory try, what we did is we just said, okay, just for the heck of it, let's take them at their word for it. Let's say we can get $1,250. What is that going to look like? So at $1,250 times 16 units times 12 months, our income jumped by almost $50,000. We kept our same 5% vacancy. Now, we also raised our expenses again because when we raise the rent, the only expense that we know absolutely will go up when we raise the rent is the management fee. So if our management fee, if our income went up, if you notice here, our income went up by about $30,000 or $40,000. So we raised our management fee by another $3,000. So we took the original expenses and then we added another $3,000 because we knew our property management was going to go up. And actually that should be $4,000. So we knew that was going to go up. But just because you raise the rent doesn't mean your property taxes will go up. Just because you raise the rent doesn't mean your insurance will go up. It doesn't mean your electricity is going to go up. It doesn't mean your water is going to go up. It doesn't mean your repairs and maintenance is going to go up. But the property management will, because the property management companies get paid based on how much they collect. So if you raise the rent from $190 to $240, which is $50,000, right, they're going to get a bigger share of that. All right. So now looking at our numbers, now look at our internal cap rate. Our internal cap rate is now up to 9%. We still have the same loan based on our $1.75 million purchase price. By the way, notice that we're back at the original purchase price of $1.75 million. Same loan amount. And now look at our numbers down below. Our cash flow just went through the roof to $61,000 a year. Our DCR, our debt service coverage ratio, now is at 1.63, meaning we're making 63% more than what we're paying the lender. And our cash on cash return is now 12.5%. Now, before we get too far into this, one of the other things that we did is, let me go do this very quickly, is I need to change my share here. Hold on. one of the things that we did is we went to Rentometer just to do a quick check. Now I don't remember the address of the property, but when we went out to Rentometer, actually, you know what? Let me go back. That's not correct because I changed this and I didn't change it back. This originally was at 1150. Hang on a second here. So I left this at where we finished it up. So that's why this was at 3%, or sorry, $3,000, because we had only raised it to 1150, from 995 to 1150. But look at our numbers down here. They still are crushing it. We're still at $43,000, which is over $2,000 per unit per year. Our DCR is at 1.45, and our cash on cash return is at 9%. What we did is we went to Rentometer and we put in the property address, and based on Rentometer and a half-mile radius, it actually said that we should be able to get $1,250 instead of $1,150. The seller was telling us we should be able to raise the rent to $1,150. Rentometer said we should be able to get $1,250. So that's why up here we had changed this to $1,250, and that's the numbers that we were just looking at. I'm sorry about that. I forgot that I left this where it was at the end of the day, and this is what the property could potentially do. So based on all of this information, you tell me. Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Would you be interested in putting in an offer on this property based on what I just showed you with this quick analysis software? Yeah. So this just happened to be a killer deal. So that's one of the things that I told the student. This was on Saturday. So I told her, I said, on Monday, you should be reaching out to the seller or the seller's agent, and you should be putting in an offer on this property. Now, she can certainly ask for more information. There was a couple questions I think we were asking, because one of the things that you want to do is even if they give you pro forma numbers and they don't give you what are called actual or current numbers, you still want to ask them if they will give you actual or current numbers. Sometimes they'll say yes, just because you ask, they'll give them to you. Sometimes they'll say no, we won't give them to you until you have either we have an accepted letter of intent or an accepted contract. So hopefully she reached out to them. As a matter of fact, she was so excited about it, they signed up for the boot camp, which was awesome. So they're coming to the boot camp in Denver, which is going to be in a couple of weeks at the end of June, because her and her husband are when we analyzed the deal, they were just like, yeah, let's go for it. Because sometimes we do find killer deals like this, and quite frankly, sometimes we don't. Sometimes the deals that we do in class, because I actually look at live deals. I don't want to put up something that I found somewhere. I want people to bring in deals that they found. And sometimes we put up deals and they're dogs, and I let you know that they're dogs. Or I let you know what you might need to do to fix the deal, to make it or turn it into a deal that actually makes sense. The other thing that I would recommend that people do, and I need to fix my share here again, just a second, is besides, and by the way, Rentometer is not a be-all end-all. I'm not suggesting that just because Rentometer said that we should be able to get $1,250, that you should rush, bull rush into this. I will tell you again and again and again that this is just one source. You need to talk to 3 live property managers in the market where the property is located that manage that type of property to confirm that whatever rental rates they think you can get. And if they confirm what Rentometer says, that you can get $1,250, this could be an absolutely killer deal. Even if they say, yeah, you could get $1,150, which is what the seller said you could get, it was still a really good deal that they should be moving forward on at this point. But there's a couple other things that you should be doing. One of those is, and I lost my, hang on a second here. Oh, there it is. Sorry. One of the other things I do is I go to Google Maps. And by going to Google Maps, especially since they were in Denver and the property was in Tennessee, they don't have to hop on a plane and go flying down there right away. I'm going to see. I wish I could remember the number. I think it was like 211 something. El Ria. There we go. Hey, look at that. I remembered it. This is the property right here. So what you can do is you can click on the picture here or click on the picture here, and it takes you right down to street level. So what I do with Google Maps is when I go down to street level, I want to see what the neighborhood looks like. I want to see what the cars in the parking lot look like. I want to see what the building looks